Welcome and thank you for being here. This podcast invites you to journey through conversations which share the fascination of the physical matter we inhabit, the breathing body. These conversations explore its inherent intelligence, movements, and healing. I'm talking to people from various fields of research and practice, such as osteopathy, dance, somatic practices, anatomy, embryology, spirituality, and many more. Would you like to learn about our miraculous body and be inspired in many new ways? Then this podcast is for you. My name is Flurina and I'm the host of this podcast. I'm an osteopath with a background in dance and yoga and based in London where I practice, lecture and research. I hope you enjoy these episodes and I'm looking forward to hear from you. Hello everyone and hello Ian and welcome on the podcast. I was just thinking before, it feels like such a lush, blessed Monday morning to spend Monday morning before doing anything else with you and talking about the breathing body. Are you joining us from Italy or Ireland?
I'm in Italy today. Yeah. So
you are in Italy. Are you? What is happening in Italy at the moment? Tell us. Where are you in your life at the moment?
It's sunny today, but I'm heading to Ireland tomorrow. Well, I think it's sunny as well. So yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, I think it's at the moment. It's a heat wave, the UK heat wave. Yeah. And what I was then also thinking this morning is literally let us dive right in. Ian, you have been an osteopath for many years and you witnessed many bodies healing themselves many times. And I know it because I witnessed it with you and through you. And again, when I was walking through the park this morning, I was thinking, well, the breathing body isn't, or witnessing the body healing itself, the self-healing body isn't exactly that's the breathing body. That is the breathing body. That is the miraculous body. And maybe that's where we dive right in.
Okay. I mean, well, what do we mean by the breathing body? You know, that's an interesting question, isn't it, in itself? Mm-hmm. Because in our work, we're looking at a specific way that the body breathes in relationship primarily to its health. This is what we're really looking to, is to restore someone's connection to the fundamental expression of their health. So both you and I, we treat a lot of complicated cases, a lot of children who have a lot of things going on with their lives. And our job really is to unleash their potential, to find their potential. So when we're doing that, or if we're working with someone who has a long and chronic illness, we have to orientate and find the potential for their health, right? That's where we stand and that's where we place ourselves in relationship. And because sometimes these people can't find their own fulcrum for their own health, their own way to access their own health. And our subtle but important role in this is to find a way for them to find for themselves. So actually, the goal of the treatment, of course, is for the person to access their own health potential. That's what it's all about, isn't it, what we're doing? And that's what it's a very beautiful thing to engage in, isn't it? As you know, and that's why we're all smiling about it, because we're always looking for the potential in whatever situation. And there are quite strong situations that we often deal with these days. And so, yes, we're finding this breathing, this natural fluid breathing, which is a deep connection. It's like what we call primary respiration is a slower, more rhythmic breathing. And that happens through every cell in the body. It's how every cell metabolizes, takes in nutrients and releases in it. Every very, very slow and rhythmic breathing. That's what we're trying to connect with. And that connects with this secondary respiration, the breathing that we take in and connect with the world with. So what is very beautiful about taking a breath, when we take a breath in, is we connect to the wider world. We connect with the trees. The trees that are doing this incredible thing of taking in carbon dioxide and restoring the oxygen balance that we, with each breath, connect within. So actually, when we're breathing, we're connecting with this wider nature, and we forget that. We forget that connection.
Yes, yes, my answer is a smile. For us osteopathic, yeah, there is almost no words to answer. I think it's wonderful that you went to that point, because one thing which we will talk about, the book you've just written or released recently, one big thing which I so much want to talk with you is exactly this delicate, you call it the delicate, quiet, soft place within the breath. And I'm now aware that maybe many listeners who listen right now, they think, what, hang on, he's talking about a secondary and a primary respiration. There is just, I can breathe air in and out, but what does he mean with the primary respiration? And I would love to go a little bit deeper into that, Ian, especially for people who hear that the first time. What is that primary breath, or what happens if we connect to that? What is the magic about that delicate, quiet, soft place within our breath? What happens then?
Okay, you're asking two things there. The first thing is what we're talking about with this primary respiration is something that is there from the beginning, from conception. This primary respiration, what happens through everything in nature, and what we learn to feel very early on in our postgraduate osteopathic career, say, is to feel this physiological motion, right? It's a physiological, slower, rhythmic breathing, and it happens through every cell in the body. It's quiet, and it is an expression of the fundamentals of health in the body. Now, when that expression becomes limited in the body, then there can be problems that happen, because the normal metabolism, which is the normal taking in of nutrients like oxygen and metabolites, and the removal of toxins from the body, which happens on a cellular level. Every cell in the body is doing this, right? And it's doing this at this delicate, fluid, rhythmic breathing mechanism. So what we do is we try to feel this. Now, you talk about anxiety, and anxiety, in some ways, you could say that anxiety is born from a sense of separation, from a disconnect from the wholeness and the oneness of everything, right? And it's very easy for us to become anxious. And I spend a lot of my time working with anxiety, and we live in an age of anxiety. And, when about 20, 25, 30 years ago, when I was working with children who were anxious, they may be teenagers, yeah? And then 15 years ago, you'd get 7 or 8 year olds, who had symptoms of anxiety. Some of them were quite strong. Now, it's so much younger. It's under 5s that have anxiety. It's like children are overwhelmed, okay, sensorially, yeah? They spend less time in nature, connecting to that natural rhythm. It's all about rhythm, and that's interesting that a lot of your podcasts are about rhythm, okay? And children's natural connective rhythm to nature and play has been lost, because we're in this electronic age where we're overstimulated. We all are. Everyone, I was talking to an 80-year-old who's saying to me, I can't get to sleep. And I say, well, what do you do before sleep? And he's saying, oh, I scroll. And I'm like, you know, so everyone's doing that, which is not great. So there is an overstimulation. There is a lot of unresolved trauma that children hold as well. And, you know, it can start off from the very beginnings, from a complex delivery where they hold a bit of shock. So you've got a baby who's had a difficult delivery where, say, they couldn't take the first breath properly, right? And that's a massive transition in the vascular supply from the fetal circulation through the placenta to the lungs opening and breathing and connecting with the outside world. Yeah. And if there is a difficulty in that, say, sometimes that can create a little bit of subtle shock in the system. They're held in. And in order to allow breath, because we're talking about breath a lot here, we may as well, the breath to connect and open fully, okay, we have to release a little bit of that shock. We do this all the time, don't we? But what can happen is some of these subtle patterns can get wired into our brains. And as we develop in relationship to the world, if our early experiences are those of a little bit of shock or a little bit of trauma physically or physiologically, it's like our nervous system is set to a high tone of reactivity. Yeah. So it's like, you know, the antennae are out. Yeah. And that is in a normal situation, is ameliorated. It's finished by the look of love of the mother, the bonding, the oxytocin hormone, which releases some of these tension things. It's a normal process of bonding, allows the baby or any wild animal, or a little kitten or a puppy or whatever, to get over this shock. Yeah. But the trouble is when we're in difficult environments and the mother's been taken away and the bonding isn't so natural and so fluid, a little bit of shock can be held in. You know, then you get an overstimulation, and what happens, interestingly enough, is part of the brain, there's a few parts of the brain that are involved in anxiety. One of them is the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is an interesting part of the brain in that it is the direct connection between the senses and a response. It's pre-conscious. So there's no conscious thinking, right, in the responses. So what happens is it works brilliantly if there's a wild animal, right, out there, and we see something and we respond before we think about it. It's fast, right? It's subcortical, doesn't go to the cortex, the thinking part of the brain. It's extremely effective. The problem is these parts of our brain can also get stimulated by thoughts, by beliefs, by ways of thinking and ways of being in the world. And if you have a child who has 7 years old, huge social pressures, for example, which is craziness, yeah, it can facilitate, it can irritate this part of their brain, so they become hyper triggered, right, and reactive. And so an anxiety response is pre-conscious. It works before we can have any conscious thinking about it, right? So our body's already responded. You think about something that's upsetting, your body's responded. You know, you get shivers down the spine, you go into a reaction. Yeah. And so the problem is, very simply, is this part of our brain has become triggered, a lot of it by electronics, a lot of it by overstimulation, and all these subtle layers that come in fill up the glass so it's too full already, almost. And so it will outspill and we have a reaction. And that is relatively, unfortunately, normal nowadays. And so what we're trying to do is to try and defacilitate this irritation. You know, what happens is a certain part of the brain, especially the amygdala and the hippocampus, what happens in a stress response, okay, when we are anxious, we wire that into our brains. So it actually becomes, that part of the brain grows, the amygdala grows. Now the hippocampus, which is about memory usually, and memory process, that in a cortisol stress reaction actually shrinks. So you've got that part of the brain, the amygdala, and below it you've got the hippocampus, which is shrinking. So you get this physiological change. So that's why you want to actually take active practices to like rewire your brain, literally. to actually allow that to change back into its normal function. So when we're working in practice, when we're working with children whose nervous systems are reactive, overly reactive, and we can take them to this quieter, calmer, more rhythmic place and release any shock they're holding or any other stuff that's accumulated in their bodies, that's beautiful. Okay, but as we get older, we need, and I think we're very much in the age now where people are wanting to do something for themselves. Yeah, it's a self-empowerment process, and I'm really for that, because when we're working with people, we can take away your symptoms and it'll all be fine. But actually, people are saying, "Well, what can I do?"
Yes.
Exactly. What can I do to help this? And that's really what so I started to think about this a few years ago, and I'd give out practices for people. A lot of the stuff is online. You give out a practice where people can reorientate themselves towards their health, say, or you can do a specific practice that can calm down an acute anxious response, like certain type of breathing, like a vagal breathing, which calms down the nervous system a little bit. So I was giving people practice, and I was thinking, gosh, this is taking too much time from because to go through stuff. So I thought, well, I'll just record some. And then I thought, well, okay, actually get people to do an online course. So I started doing online courses about some like self-healing ones, or ones on anxiety and stuff like that. So people could go through processes, because actually, if you're as an adult, in order to kind of wire your brain, you have to do an active practice. You can't just do one breathing thing. You have to do something. You have to spend 10 minutes or whatever, 20 minutes a day doing specific processes which can actually ongoingly rewire your brain. You see, and that's the reason for doing all that kind of stuff, so people can find their own way and empower themselves to overcome these feelings, which are conquerable. So that's really where that comes from.
I'm so glad, Ian, I'm so glad for everything you shared right now, but especially that you did use the word also empower, because that's exactly my aim also of this podcast, right? I think it's so wonderful what we do as osteopaths, but really my vision or mission is I would like to bring that message to any patient or person that actually it's also all there in them.
Yes.
The body, this wisdom, this intelligence, it's there with our support, but also without our support. And I think that's where the huge potency, and it's so important. It feels much more honest to me to actually share that as much as share the work of our hands.
It's very true, and it's really very interesting personally for me, because I've been practicing for 30 whatever years. Okay, and just in the last 2 or 3 years, I'm increasingly working with people who want to engage with what I'm doing, right, and go, okay, can you just talk while you're doing me? Tell me what you're feeling. Tell me. And I'm sort of saying, well, there's, something's happening around here. And can you feel that? And so I'm saying, can you feel that this is softening and this is opening and this is starting to, and your nervous system is softening and whatever. And people want to engage with their own consciousness in the program. Now, sometimes it can be tricky. Some people, I say, hang on, just wait a minute. Your brain's too involved here. Right?
Like with me.
Yeah, exactly. Too much thinking. Exactly. But when people come to more of a quiet place within themselves and start to feel, because it's their body. That's the point. It's theirs. You know what I mean? It's so actually
not really yours.
Yeah, exactly. So I've really I'm reconsidering actually things in how I'm working, because of that. Because people, in the end, what do they want from a healing experience? No matter what, is they want to come out empowered around their own health. And so there's still a place for I'll take all your symptoms away, but there's very much also a place for an engagement, an active process of. But what our job, when one of the most important things, and certainly on a lot of my online courses, you start with refinding our connection to our health. If we can find that, because we're so fundamentally orientated towards what's wrong in our bodies. Where's our aches? Where's our pains? Where's what doesn't feel right? And we become quite transfixed by that on a feeling level, on a feeling sensing level. If we actually just spend a couple of minutes feeling what feels nice, what feels fluid, what feels delicate, what feels soft, what feels expressive or potent in our bodies, if we orientate to what feels nice, not what feels odd or wrong, it grows. What you focus on grows. So actually, the most simple self-healing technique is to spend a few minutes orientating on what feels nice. And sometimes you can't feel it at the beginning. Sometimes you go, well, nothing feels very nice. So then I get people to orientate on something that feels soft or quiet or delicate in their breathing, right? It's because we normally focus on deep breathing or this, but what is actually quiet in our breathing? So actually softening our breathing takes us into a different way of interacting with it. And so if we soften our breathing, quieten our breathing, what tends to happen in a process of meditation? Well, what happens as soon as we orientate ourselves to what feels soft and what feels quiet in the breath, our brain goes crazy. Blah, 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 blah. All of that thinking stuff comes in, right, immediately. So what's the next process in normal meditation is you fully allow that, right? You fully allow your brain to do whatever it's doing, but then quietly reorientate yourself to this softness in the breathing. You don't block it, you don't judge it. You let your brain do what it wants to, yeah? And there's something very important in that process of allowing things, right? Allowing things to be. As soon as we allow, if we're treating a patient, it's the same process. You allow things and and then you start to orientate yourself towards the potential health, right? In yourself in the same way as you do with a patient. So the process of healing, or true healing, if you could say, has to be to do with, number one, self-acceptance, or finding a state of neutrality with ourselves. A lot of the people that we work with could have, if you looked at them diagnostically, if they have marked cerebral palsy, or they were had a strong autistic tendency, or were certainly extremely neurodiverse, or someone who's going through a process where they're dying. Actually, what is true healing in those contexts? That's an interesting thing, because actually, for the child or the adult with cerebral palsy, for them to find a quality of peace and natural expression in the world is perfect healing. That is, you're not going to get rid of the cerebral palsy necessarily. The same with an autistic adult or child. Actually, what you want is, you can't change society. That would be the ideal thing, so that society would understand an autistic person. So we have to allow them to find a coherence, so that they're not anxious or overwhelmed so much, and that's it. Or if someone is going through a process where they're very ill and they're dying, you want them to find a sense of peace before they go through that process, that transitional process. So that's true healing. Actually, true healing doesn't mean you fix someone's whatever so much. It's allowing people to come to a point of a deep resolution, hopefully, as much as they can within their situation. I mean, other times you fix their back. That's fine, But it's wide, isn't it? And that's what makes it very exciting, actually.
Wow, in that moment, you really remind me to something which I think I forgot a bit, but you're absolutely... I'm now thinking that, I think, wow, yeah, of course, actually, I can be ill and I can die in perfect, in inverted commas, health,
Yes.
or in wholeness,
Very much so.
which right now touches me deeply. I haven't actually thought about that in that way, but
It's a hugely important area that we can work with. I mean, I've been doing this many, many years, and it's one of the most important things we can do, actually, is to allow for that, a natural reconnection with the quieter peace that's there you know, so that it's not so traumatic to go through that process. It's a great gift to be able to be there in those moments, I would suggest. Yeah.
And simultaneously, this is what could or what happens or what we can invite every day in all these little, also less extreme situations, right? If yes, I might feel my head or my back, or I'm stressed, or I just got upset, blah, blah, and I allow that, I notice, but then is that what you're talking about? Yes, I can sit down and notice in that moment within all the things which are crazy about me. I notice that quiet, soft, delicate points. And no, it makes me smile in that moment because I notice, wow, actually, yeah, the world is crazy and there is still healing, or I'm still healed.
But we can still, this is the point, is that we can do this 100% for ourselves, right? Sometimes we need help, right? But actually, if you're feeling completely stressed, anxious, your back's just gone into spasm, right? If you sit down or lie down quietly and just soften your breathing, let your body relax, let it all go quiet, yeah? And wait for getting a sense of expression, even if something feels tight in your back. Is there some tiny, tiny pinhead of something that feels softer in it? Can you meet that in your experience, in your feeling sense? Is there something soft within that hardness or tightness or pain that is trying to express itself? And we orientate really strongly on that potential, that softness within it. And it can't, sometimes it's too painful, that area that's, or your shoulder or wherever that's hurting. You have to focus somewhere else. You know, you focus on something quiet in your heart, say, you know, or wherever. But we reorientate towards our health, and then the body recognizes that and it tunes the body into its natural. I mean, there's nothing more effective at self-healing than the body. You know, you can break a bone and it knits back in a few days. You know, you can have all sorts of trauma that happens to the body physically or physiologically, and it can heal itself. You know, and one of our biggest tricks is, when we're learning this work, is to get out of the way of the healing. You know, we facilitate by not being too there. That's why the work is quieter, and we're meeting that potential expression, as opposed to trying to fix it all and pull it all apart. It doesn't work. It's so well. So the interesting thing when you go through this journey when we're working is the more, and it's very Taoist, isn't it, in its way, the more gentle, the more fluid, the deeper it works, you know. And if people are, when we first try, we're trying too hard to do something, because, you know, we learn we have to do something to fix it, you know. And once we soften up and become more gentle, then the whole world opens up, doesn't it? You start feeling all this aliveness and expression, you know.
Yeah. And I have this image of, it's actually, you know, it sounds like, oh, come on, I cannot just, some listeners might think, really, by just meeting that delicate, quiet, soft place, it's just a tiny thing, and then I can actually facilitate so much healing. But now I'm thinking, well, we are right back to what you said in the beginning. You did mention conception. We are back with the biggest laws of nature, that our body will always strive for healing. Or our deepest wisdom always, I mean, sperm and egg meet, and you know much more about that. Maybe tell us about that. Why? Yes, it's such little input, but it's these huge doors which open, because body thinks,
Of course. And there's this whole process of ignition, boom, which is a potentizing of the cell. And so this conceptus, which is the egg that has been fertilized, is alive and breathing, you know, and it has this process of ignition, which is like the spark going off, and it forms within itself as the chromosomes come together. The 2 times 23, the male and the female, come together. They create this original midline, right? This is a point of orientation. And as the embryo, the early embryo, the conceptus, turns into an embryo, starts to perfectly unfold itself, perfect natural unfolding and growth and development that happens unerringly perfectly. You know, it's an incredible thing, and this has a natural power to it that's unfolding itself. the interesting thing about that is when we're engaging in this soft, gentle, fluid way, we're meeting these formative forces that are still present in the body. And so those formative forces that create the embryo are actually there as inherent motions in the body that are there throughout life till the day we die. And, and those forces, those movements that we tune into feel with are the restorative forces for health in the body. So this is what we're doing. We're going into a deeper level of a blueprint for health in the body through movement, subtle movement. And we're refinding and reconnecting with that blueprint for health. And so that's what we're doing when we're working with everybody, no matter what's going on with their system. We're connecting to that natural process of unfolding, which is happening every second in us, all our lives, which is incredible, actually. And we just become disconnected from that, for whatever reasons. It can be environmental toxins that do this. It can be stress. It can be genetic or epigenetic threads that come and affect us, or so many different things can come in to that perfect unfolding, and so if you're like, for example, if you're looking at the normal development, say, of an embryo fetus, certainly later on, and the normal neurological development. Now, sometimes there can be very subtle things that can come in and just have a tiny little effect on that natural unfolding. For example, if mum has a virus or is engaged with some sort of industrial toxin or whatever, pesticide or whatever they are, stressed, or and it can have subtle effects on that natural unfolding. And maybe that can be part of a thread that and possibly with some genetic or epigenetic ideas that can have some effect on the normal growth and development. And so you may have some subtle developmental issue with the child. Now, this is an area where I spend a lot of time in allowing these children to flower, right? To open up into their potential. It's an area that I really love, and I'm just about to teach a course in that, in neurodiversity. I'm working with it. And so what we're trying to do is to go back and unblock subtle blocks that have affected this perfect expression. And mostly it's extremely subtle. What's unless there's a very strong thing that's happened to the child and they have quite severe problems. But most of the stuff we're dealing with is very, very subtle. It's I'd say very subtle tendency to autism, or subtle tendency to dyspraxia or dyslexia, or any of these kind of things. And actually, when we're working with these forces, it really gives us a great potential to help unlock them, unleash them, or help their brains to flower and open in the way that we want them to. And I think that's a wonderful part of what we do.
That makes me think of when I spoke with Mary. She used that metaphor for people to understand health, the picture of a river which really just wants to flow unimpeded. And she explained how her role that is just to see, okay, well, where is maybe an obstacle in the way, or what can I just change? What can I remove so that the river can flow unimpeded? But she didn't shuffle in more water, or
no, exactly.
And I think that's exactly what you're talking about as well.
Very much so. Very much so. Very much so. Mary and I, we studied at the same time. We didn't really know each other at school because I was a young kid. I was a very young kiddo, and I was out and about all the time, and didn't make too many lectures. But when we finished at the osteopathic school there, we were thrown together at Stuart course practice, which you work at, I know, and we would do Saturdays together. And we didn't know what we're beginning. You know how it is when you first.
Yes.
I was 22 years old, and we were being presented with extremely difficult cases, right? But what we did is we worked together because there was no one else around on Saturdays, and we'd share. We'd put one person would have their hands on the feet, one on the head, and we we'd go, what's this feeling? And so we'd learn to engage with the potential of the patients. And it was a very lovely experience actually to work together. I mean, a lot of the work when we're learning this is best done in groups anyway, because the learning experience is much more deep. And, you know, we were like osteopathic babies together, trying to, you know, go into the world and work. And that's a long time ago now, anyway.
I just had something said. Oh yeah, that brought me, when you talked about sharing how you explored with Mary together, you both would put hands and exchange, what can you feel? The other big question which I wanted to ask you, Ian, because yes, you have just written that amazing book, it's here, Healing Anxiety, and you work with people without touch. I also know you work with people actually online through digital media, but in these moments when you do work with a client in your room and you use your hands, you use touch, what role does the touch play? How do you use touch in your practice? And what's, maybe the question is, what are the processes which you facilitate through your touch?
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing is we are, as humans, are made to touch. You know, our engagement on a physical level
Thanks
is
for saying that.
it's the most natural thing in the world. Okay, and it becomes, you know, it's harder for people sometimes to engage as a patient, to be touched by a physical therapist, no matter what you do. Is it massage or is it hands-on treatments? There isn't a process of engaging, you know, and that can be a challenge to certain people, you know, who've had complex histories. But it's a great and beautiful gift. So when we obviously, you and I, we work with tiny babies a lot of the time, you know, who are, say, they come in and they're colicky and they're screaming the place down and et cetera, and they've had a degree, maybe they've had a little bit of shock, or maybe they've had a slightly complicated birth or whatever. There's something that's causing them to have sore tummies, for example, or some sort of silent reflux or whatever. But actually, when we engage them, right, we're engaged. What's interesting is, coming back to our development, our skin and our nervous systems are made of the same germ layer, right, which in our creation. So actually, our sensorium, our skin, is completely connected with our central nervous system, right? And that's a very interesting thing. That's why I remember doing this with my children when they were babies, we'd have massage time, you know, and that's the most beautiful thing. Baby massage is beautiful because it defines their natural boundaries in the world, and it's in a loving way, you know. And that's why we want to be held like as a baby, and when we want to be held as an adult, being held. So there's something that can be extremely nurturing and supportive by holding someone, you know. I mean, I remember that one of the psychiatrists, who was an osteopath, who would teach us our osteopathic school, whatever, 30 so years ago, he'd call cranial osteopathy mummy therapy. You know, because they'll hold it, and because there is a quality of nurture in it, which is kind of interesting, you know. So there is some powerful quality about engaging in touch. Now, if you engage with touch and with your touch, you are meeting their potential health in their body. If you can look at their body as sort of fluid, you know, because we are mainly fluid, and we meet a sense of fluidity or a tendency towards a quietening in the body. You know, what we're trying to do at the beginning is allow this body to come out of its sense of distress, right? So that they can drop into somewhere that's much quieter. And as soon as the nervous system drops off from its, like, you know, when we're thinking, you know, you're working in the city, right? You know, when I'm practicing in the city in London, say, you know, to allow people to come to a point of quiet, a point of neutral, where their brain's taken out of gear, is the goal of treatment. You know, that's meant to be the first stage, right? To get people to chill a little bit and their nervous system to soften, and then these natural, self-correcting, healing forces unravel themselves. Yeah, it's just when we're locked in our brains and our nervous systems are agitated that there is no quiet, soft breathing. Yeah, in the system. So that's the basic thing. And so actually, if we're putting our hands on and we meet this tendency to quiet, allow their nervous system to drop into a state of neutral, then we can start to access someone's health. Yeah. And then all the magic starts. Everything starts to wake up. It's like it's all, and then it softens, and then it starts to breathe and wake up, and the whole world opens, doesn't it? So that's why hands-on treatment is extremely beautiful, because we're facilitating that and engaging with people directly, and it's a very a beautiful environment. Also, if we are if someone has had a traumatic relationship with touch in their history, if we can slowly provide a place of safety where this is a safe place, right, where I can hold your head or whatever, or I can hold your feet or whatever, yeah, and we can work with that in itself can become a healing experience, yeah, because it can reprogram that person's pre-conscious reactivity to touch into a place where they can say, well, maybe it can be safe here to be touched. And with some people, that's huge,
Wow. Yeah, it's really touching what you're saying, Ian. And I'm now thinking, we talked about how people can drop in, or how we can drop into or connect to that delicate, soft, quiet space in our breathing. And on some level, that's how you use your touch in practice. You place your hands onto different body parts, I would imagine, and it's the same place we're talking about. I'm now thinking, well, maybe sometimes intuitively, very often when I do your breathing practice, I actually do place my hand onto my chest, because in moments when I'm hugely distressed or overwhelmed, it can be difficult to find that place.
Yes,
just
that's true.
Without any touch. And I would place my hands onto my chest and see, well, can I use my own touch as a guide or as just a support in that moment too? Can I, instead of just feeling it, can I actually palpate it with my hand? Where in my chest is that soft and quiet place?
Because it's always there, but it's often hidden behind.
Yes, it's
a
always
whole
there,
load
but
of
it's
stress
hidden.
and trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, it's wonderful. It might maybe it's probably right now horizon opening for some people, who went to osteopath and have only been cracked, which isn't a bad thing. Sometimes you do need
it's all
a good
osteopathy.
cracker. It's all osteopathy, but it's just wonderful to widen our horizon. That wow, there are so many ways to use this very potent medium of touch.
Absolutely. No, then just to be come back to like cracking osteopathy. People no, the point is this: is osteopaths who do that and who practice that, and we're all trained in that as well, are extremely skilled, actually. And it's interesting because you get the practitioners who have been doing this kind of work for 40 years, right? And it's an incredible thing to watch, how they can do the physical, and it's fluid, and they're doing what we do, they're meeting the potential for health, and everything unfolds, and it's a beautiful thing, and they're using their hands in an incredibly skilled way, and I have plenty of respect for that work, actually.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how, right? It matters what do we orient ourselves to.
I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it.
I think that's
and
what,
people, when they work with people over a long period of time, and I sometimes am fortunate enough to and have been to teach osteopaths who had been have been working 30 years longer than me when I was first teaching, and they had this incredible, because if you spend that time with people, there is, and if you're working for 30 years finding people's health, they have that natural engagement, even if they don't know the techniques I'm teaching them, say, but they have a natural sense of it, which is a lovely thing, actually. Yeah.
Wow, we journeyed through a really potent and inspiring conversation, Ian. And I'm now again looking at your book and seeing the title Healing Anxiety. And now I think we started talking about the first couple of first words you mentioned were unleashing our potential, which I think is so beautiful, unleashing the potential. And I think, well, healing anxiety couldn't, in a way, the title healing anxiety to allow the big healing to happen. Or I'm thinking, am I right to think that actually anxiety might be one of the biggest barrier to unleash that potential? So
Well,
really, you
it
invite,
certainly can be, because we're,
or
you
not
know,
necessarily.
when we're in a state of anxiety, our nervous system is facilitated, it's agitated, there's no quietness, our breathing goes, the blood pressure may go up a little bit, whatever. There's lots of physiological responses in anxiety which have an effect. There's an increased releasing cortisol from the adrenal cortex, for example, and that has a physiological effect on the body. And so actually, if we can calm down or get people, the best thing is, of course, is to get people or our patients to find a way for themselves to calm down that response acutely in the moment. So in that book, and on the online courses, you go through a process where, first of all, you use these kind of anxiety breaks, which are specific techniques to stop the reaction, right? But that's the very beginning of it. To understand the reaction is number one, to understand our physiology so we're not frightened by it. Number two is to stop an anxious response, right, before it overwhelms us. And then the biggest part of it is more the deep processes of bringing ourselves in relationship to our health, finding a deeper sense of peace, a connectiveness, a connection to these natural, more fluid situations, which actually are in nature. Okay, that directly connects us to nature. So we talk about these tides and these rhythms, but these tides and rhythms are in nature, you know. So this kind of fast rate that our bodies go into, this in this primary respiration, in wild animals, that is a state of distress. So because actually wild animals, everything's more slow and it's more rhythmical, and so is this rhythmic fluidity that's out there in the trees and in nature. Everything connects up, and that's the goal in the end, is to reconnect with that part of it, and reconnect with nature and our inner, deeper nature, right? And those processes start to become really healing, and that's the kind of goals of this kind of work, I feel, is really for us. And actually, it's in the end, all of the work, all of everything that I teach, all of the meditations, all of the courses I do, everything, in the end, it's to reconnect ourselves to a sense of wholeness and to a sense of oneness with everything, right? Especially through nature. And that is, it's beautiful, actually, once that comes through with people, because that's what we lose when we get into distress. But it can take a long time. Yes, it can take, if people are in a marked anxiety state, it can take a long time for people to head towards that place. But it's always possible, I think. It's just we need to pursue it and work at it. And that's why, doing practices is very important, I think. Yeah.
Wow, wholeness and oneness, there are no more words I can say or add. And I was just thinking, I think this is the episode with which I will invite everyone to actually maybe listen to it outside, walking through the forest or lying in the grass. And I think on that breath, I really wish or would encourage all the listeners to, oops. Ian just disappeared. I go on and he might come back. I was just about to say that on that note, dear listeners, I wish and I invite all of you to go and explore this quiet, delicate, soft place in your own breath. And with lots of playfulness and curiosity and patience to just start to discover, how does it feel? What happens if I open the space for healing to happen, and for that sense of health, which has always been there, to flow through me like a river of water, as Mary said. Ian is still not here, so I think that's okay. That's where we end this podcast episode. And I will write in the show notes where you can find Ian, how you can find his book, in case you do need some guidance or support in that process of healing anxiety and finding back to health.